1. My sister married a man 40 years older, and I can't stand him. Before we continue with the video and the interesting stories, I want to ask you for help. I'm trying to reach 1,000 subs by the end of the year, so I'd really appreciate it if you would subscribe and help me out. Okay, let's continue. You know, family is supposed to be your safe space, right? A place where you can go for support, for love, for understanding. I used to feel that way until my sister made a decision that turned my whole world upside down. She married a man, no, not just any man, a man 40 years older than her. And if I'm being honest, I can't stand the guy. Not one bit. Before you start judging me, let me tell you everything. Maybe then you'll understand why this situation drives me insane. It's not just the age difference, it's so much more than that. Let me take you back to the start. My sister, let's call her Emily, and I have always been close. Growing up, she was my best friend. We did everything together, shared secrets, supported each other through tough times, all that good stuff. She was 2 years younger than me, but we were inseparable. We weren't the kind of siblings who fought all the time. Sure, we had our differences, but nothing that lasted more than a few hours. If she needed something, I was there for her, and I know she would have done the same for me in a heartbeat. I think that's why it hurt so much when all this went down. We grew up in a pretty average family. Mom and Dad were supportive, but not overbearing. We didn't grow up rich, but we never felt like we lacked anything. Our parents made sure we had a good education and every opportunity to succeed. I went off to college first, and Emily followed soon after. She was always the more creative one. She studied art while I went into business. Different paths, but we never grew apart. Even with our busy lives, we made time for each other. We'd grab lunch, catch a movie, or just hang out whenever we could. She was always so full of life, you know? The kind of person who lights up a room when she walks in. But then, a couple of years ago, things started to change. Emily met him. Let's call him Richard. When she first told me about him, I thought she was joking. I remember that phone call like it was yesterday. She called me one evening, her voice all excited. She said, I met someone. And I was like, oh, that's great. Tell me about him. And she said, well, there's one thing, he's a bit older. So, I asked, how much older? Like 5 years. 10. And she laughed, that nervous laugh, and said, no. More like 40. My heart stopped for a second. 40 years. I mean, that's practically a lifetime of difference. He's old enough to be her father, hell, her grandfather. But she wasn't joking. And honestly, that's where the nightmare began. At first, I tried to be supportive. I really did. I mean, it's her life, right? She's an adult, she can make her own decisions. But still, 40 years. That's not just an age gap, that's a whole different generation. I tried to be open-minded, though. I told myself, maybe he's a great guy. Maybe there's something special about him that Emily sees, and I just need to meet him to understand. But deep down, I had a bad feeling about it. You ever get that gut feeling that something's just wrong? Yeah, that's what I had. But I pushed it aside because, well, it's Emily. I trusted her judgment, or at least, I thought I did. I remember the first time I met Richard. Emily brought him over for dinner at our parents' house. I'll never forget that night. I was nervous, but I told myself to keep an open mind. I mean, maybe this guy wasn't as bad as I was imagining. Maybe he and Emily really did have something special. But the moment he walked in, everything about him screamed wrong. You know how some people just give off a weird vibe? That was Richard. From the way he looked at her, the way he carried himself, it just didn't sit right with me. It's hard to explain, but there was something off about him from the get-go. He was tall, with graying hair and a neatly trimmed beard, but he didn't look like a 60-something-year-old trying to relive his youth. He was clearly comfortable in his own skin, confident, but it was the kind of confidence that felt more like arrogance. He had this smug look on his face, like he knew something we didn't. I remember thinking, is this the guy Emily's been raving about? I tried to be polite. I mean, what else could I do? Our parents were uncomfortable too, though they tried to hide it. But I could see it in their eyes. We all exchanged glances when Emily wasn't looking. None of us knew what to say. So, we did the only thing we could, pretended everything was fine. We asked him questions about his life, his job. He's semi-retired, of course, living off some old investments. He talked a lot about his travels, the places he'd been, the people he'd met. He was charming in that slick, practiced way that some older men have. But there was something about the way he spoke to Emily that rubbed me the wrong way. He wasn't condescending, exactly, but it was like he always had the upper hand. Like he knew better than her. And maybe that's what bothered me the most. Emily's always been strong-willed, fiercely independent, but with Richard, it was like she became smaller. Like she was playing a role in his life, rather than living her own. Things got worse over time. Emily, who used to be so independent, so full of life, started changing. I noticed it first in little things. She'd cancel plans with me more often, or she'd show up late, distracted. She started spending all her time with Richard. Slowly, she cut off her friends. The people she'd known for years, the ones who'd been with her through thick and thin, suddenly, they weren't important anymore. I didn't want to believe it at first. I thought maybe she was just caught up in the excitement of a new relationship, that it would pass. But it didn't. She stopped coming to family gatherings unless Richard was there, and when he was there, everything felt wrong. It was like he was pulling the strings, like he was isolating her, cutting her off from the people who cared about her the most. I tried talking to her about it. I didn't want to push too hard, but I had to say something. I told her I was worried. I told her that the age difference wasn't the issue so much as the control he seemed to have over her. But she didn't see it that way. She told me I was being dramatic, that I didn't understand their relationship. And then she said something that cut me deeper than I expected. She told me I was jealous. Jealous. As if I wanted her life or something. That really stung. I've never been jealous of Emily. I've always wanted the best for her. All I wanted was for her to be happy. But I didn't see happiness anymore. I saw her becoming someone else. I tried to stay out of it after that. I mean, what could I do? Emily was an adult. She made her own choices, even if I thought they were terrible. But every time I saw her with Richard, my gut told me something was off. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I confronted Richard. We were at another family dinner, one of the few they still attended, and I asked him, straight up, what his intentions were with my sister. I didn't mince words. I said, look, Richard, I've got to know, what do you see in Emily? Why are you with her? And I swear to God, he just smiled. That smug, knowing smile, like he was some kind of puppet master pulling all the strings. He told me I wouldn't understand, that their relationship was special and that love doesn't see age. Ugh, I wanted to punch him. But of course, I didn't. What could I even say to that? It didn't take long for the rest of the family to feel the strain. Our parents didn't know how to handle it. Mom tried to keep the peace, pretending like everything was normal, but Dad couldn't even look Richard in the eye. Every family dinner was a disaster. We stopped inviting them over after a while because it was just too tense. No one wanted to address the elephant in the room, but it was always there, looming over every conversation, every interaction. Emily and I stopped talking for months. It killed me, but every conversation turned into a fight. It was like I didn't know her anymore. She was living in his world now, and nothing I said could bring her back. The breaking point came last year. Emily announced they were getting married. No warning, no engagement announcement, just, we're getting married next month. I didn't go to the wedding. I couldn't. The thought of standing there, pretending to support something I was so against, it felt wrong. My parents went, but they told me later it was like watching a stranger walk down the aisle. They said Emily seemed happy, but they couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. I regret not going sometimes. I wonder if things would be different now if I had. But honestly, I don't know if it would have made a difference. She's his wife now, and our relationship has never been the same. It's been over a year since they got married, and things haven't gotten any better. I see Emily sometimes, but it's not the same. She's distant. It's like there's this wall between us that I can't break through. I've learned to keep my opinions to myself because nothing I say is going to change her mind. I still love my sister. I always will. But this version of her, the one married to a man old enough to be her father, I don't know how to get her back. Maybe I never will. Sometimes I think about what our relationship used to be like, and it feels like a lifetime ago. The sister I knew, the one I grew up with, she's gone. And in her place is someone I barely recognize. Maybe that's just life. People change. But it still hurts. I guess that's the hardest part of all this. Family is supposed to be your safe space, right? But what do you do when the people you love make decisions that break your heart? I don't have an answer. I've thought about it a lot, and I still don't know. I guess you just learn to live with it. You learn to accept that people make their own choices, even if those choices hurt you. And maybe one day things will change. Maybe one day I'll get my sister back. But until then, all I can do is wait. And hope. Story 2. I discovered my best friend's darkest secret, and now everything's changed. You ever have one of those moments where your whole perspective on someone just shatters? Like, in an instant, the person you thought you knew becomes a stranger. That's what happened to me, and honestly, I'm still trying to figure out what to do with all of it. It's about my best friend, let's call him Jake, and the secret he's been hiding from me for years. A secret that, once I found out, changed everything between us. I don't know if things will ever go back to the way they were. I'm not even sure I want them to. I've known Jake since we were kids. We grew up together, went to the same schools, hung out all the time. We were inseparable. If you saw me, Jake was probably somewhere nearby. We shared everything, dreams, failures, heartbreaks. He was like a brother to me. People used to joke that we were like the same person, just in different bodies. And in a lot of ways, that was true. We knew each other inside out. At least, I thought we did. Jake always had this magnetic energy about him. You know the type, everyone wanted to be his friend. He had that effortless charm, that ability to make people laugh, to put them at ease. But there was also this darker side to him. It was subtle, buried beneath the jokes and the smiles. I noticed it every now and then, like when we were alone, and he'd get quiet, staring off into the distance like he was lost in his own head. I'd ask him what was up, and he'd just shake it off, say it was nothing. And I believed him, because that's what friends do, right? You trust them. But now, looking back, I wonder how many signs I missed. It all started to unravel about 6 months ago. Jake had been acting strange for a while. He was distant, canceling plans, not answering texts. At first, I figured it was just stress. He'd been working a lot, late nights, barely any time for himself. But something about it felt different this time. Like he wasn't just busy, he was avoiding me. I didn't want to push, but after a few weeks of this, I confronted him. I went over to his place unannounced, something I'd done 1,000 times before. I knocked, waited, and after what felt like forever, he opened the door. The moment I saw him, I knew something was wrong. He looked exhausted. Dark circles under his eyes, hair a mess, like he hadn't slept in days. I asked him what was going on, but he just brushed me off, said he was fine. But I wasn't buying it. I pushed harder, told him I was worried, that he didn't seem like himself. And that's when it happened. That's when he told me the truth, or at least part of it. He sat down on the couch, put his head in his hands, and said, "There's something I need to tell you, man. Something I've been hiding for a long time." My heart was racing. I had no idea what he was about to say, but I knew it wasn't going to be good. He started talking, but he was rambling, going in circles, not really making any sense. I had to practically pull it out of him. And when he finally told me, I didn't believe him at first. I couldn't. Jake had been living a double life. 4 years. All that time we spent together, all the things we shared, and he was keeping this huge part of himself hidden from me. He told me he'd gotten involved with some bad people, people I didn't even know existed. At first, it was just small things, favors, running errands for them. But then it escalated. He started getting deeper and deeper into it, until he was in way over his head. And the worst part, he didn't just owe them money, he owed them everything. His life, his future, everything. They had him on a leash, and he couldn't break free. I sat there, listening to him, trying to wrap my head around what he was saying. This was Jake, my best friend. The guy I grew up with. And now he was telling me he'd been mixed up in some kind of criminal underworld for years, without me having the slightest clue. I felt like an idiot. How could I have not known? How could I have been so blind? I asked him why he hadn't told me sooner, why he kept it a secret all this time. And he just looked at me with this hollow expression and said, "Because I didn't want to drag you into it. I didn't want you to get hurt." That hit me hard. On one hand, I understood. He was trying to protect me. But on the other hand, I felt betrayed. He kept this huge part of his life hidden from me for years. And now, because of it, I didn't even know who he was anymore. The next few days were a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about everything Jake had told me. I tried to go on with my normal routine, but it was impossible. My mind kept replaying the conversation over and over. I kept asking myself the same questions. How did I not notice the signs? Was I really that oblivious? And more importantly, what the hell was I supposed to do now? Jake called me a few times after that, but I didn't pick up. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to talk to him. I needed time to process everything, to figure out how I felt. Part of me wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but another part of me just wanted to walk away, to cut him out of my life for good. But that wasn't so easy. He was my best friend. We had history. And no matter how angry I was, I couldn't just erase all of that. About a week later, I finally agreed to meet him. We went to a quiet bar, one of our usual spots. The atmosphere was heavy. We sat in silence for a while, neither of us really knowing how to start. Eventually, Jake spoke up. He apologized. Said he never meant to hurt me, that he thought he could handle everything on his own, but it had all spiraled out of control. He admitted he was scared. Scared of what would happen to him, scared of losing me as a friend. I could see the fear in his eyes, the regret. But I was still angry. I told him how I felt, that I felt betrayed, that I didn't know if I could trust him anymore. He didn't try to defend himself. He just nodded, like he knew he deserved it. We talked for hours that night. He laid everything out, how it started, how deep he was in, the mistakes he made along the way. It was a lot to take in. I was angry, hurt, confused, but mostly I was scared for him. These weren't just small-time criminals he was dealing with. These were dangerous people, people who wouldn't think twice about hurting him, or worse. And now that I knew, I couldn't just walk away. I couldn't leave him to face it alone. So here I am, stuck in this impossible situation. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if Jake's going to make it out of this mess alive. But I do know one thing, I can't abandon him. Not now. Not after everything we've been through. He's my best friend, and no matter how much he's messed up, no matter how deep he's in, I'm not going to let him face it alone. I don't know how this is all going to end. Maybe we'll find a way to fix things, maybe we won't. But for now, all I can do is be there for him. As much as it hurts, as much as it's changed everything between us, I can't turn my back on him. Because at the end of the day, that's what friends do. They stick by each other, even when things get dark. Story 3. I caught my dad living a double life. Now I don't know who he really is. You know, you grew up with these ideas about your parents. You think you know them, right? They raise you, teach you things, tell you stories about their past, and you build this image of who they are in your head. You trust that what they show you is real, that what they tell you is the truth. I thought I knew my dad. He's always been my hero, the guy I looked up to, the one who always seemed to have the answers, always seemed to have it together. I mean, sure, we've had our ups and downs like any father and son, but I never questioned him. Never. Until now. It all started a little over a year ago. My dad, let's call him Tom, was always kind of a workaholic. He's in real estate, and growing up, he spent a lot of time traveling for business, meeting clients, showing houses. I never really thought much of it. He provided for the family, made sure we were comfortable, and even though he missed some stuff, like school events or soccer games, I always understood. He was doing it for us, you know? That's what he always said, and I believed him. I respected him for it. My mom, let's call her Karen, was the glue that held everything together. She was always there, taking care of me and my sister, keeping the house running smoothly. They were the perfect team, or so I thought. They never fought, at least not in front of us. Everything seemed fine. Normal. Until I found out that my dad had been living a double life. And suddenly, everything I thought I knew about my family came crashing down. It started innocently enough. I was home for the weekend, visiting my parents. I'd moved out a couple of years ago, but I still tried to visit as often as I could. I was close with both of them, especially my dad. He was the type who would give you advice on anything, whether it was about work, relationships, or life in general. He always had some bit of wisdom to share. Anyway, that weekend, I was in his office, helping him out with some paperwork. He was getting older and wasn't as tech-savvy, so I'd often help him with emails, files, whatever he needed. That day, I was going through his computer, organizing some files for him, when I noticed something odd. There was a folder on his desktop labeled with just a single letter, A. Now, I'm not the type to snoop. I wasn't trying to dig into his personal stuff, but something about that folder caught my eye. Maybe it was curiosity, or maybe it was just instinct. I don't know. But I clicked on it. Inside the folder were a bunch of documents, financial records, emails, photos. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. The emails were from people I didn't recognize, and the photos, well, they were of my dad. But not the dad I knew. These photos were of him with another woman. Not my mom. A much younger woman. They were smiling, holding hands, laughing. There were pictures of them at restaurants, on vacations, even at what looked like some kind of event, a wedding or a party. My stomach dropped. I remember staring at the screen, unable to process what I was seeing. This wasn't my dad. This wasn't the man I grew up with, the man who raised me. I thought maybe it was a mistake, that these were old photos or something. But then I looked at the dates. They weren't old. They were recent. Like, from the past few months. And the emails, they were love letters. My dad was telling this woman things he never said to my mom, things that made my skin crawl. I felt sick. I didn't know what to do. My first instinct was to confront him, but I hesitated. What if there was more to the story? What if I was missing something? I mean, maybe it wasn't what it looked like. Maybe this woman was just a friend, and I was overreacting. But the more I looked, the more obvious it became. This wasn't just some casual friendship. My dad was having an affair. A full-blown, secret relationship with another woman. And he'd been hiding it from us, hiding it from my mom, from me, from my sister, for who knows how long. I sat there for what felt like hours, just staring at the screen, trying to figure out what to do next. Should I tell my mom? Should I confront my dad? I had no idea. My mind was racing with 1,000 different thoughts, none of them making any sense. I couldn't believe what I was seeing, but there it was, right in front of me. Proof that the man I'd looked up to my entire life was living a lie. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I closed the folder, shut down the computer, and left the office. I needed air. I needed to think. I went for a drive, trying to clear my head, but no matter how far I drove, I couldn't escape the reality of what I'd found. My dad was cheating on my mom. He was lying to us, all of us, and had been for God knows how long. That night, I didn't say anything. I couldn't. I sat through dinner, watching my mom and dad talk and laugh like everything was normal. My mom had no idea. She was sitting there, smiling, completely unaware that her husband was betraying her. And my dad, he acted like nothing was wrong. He was his usual self, charming, funny, relaxed. But all I could see was the man in those photos, the man writing those emails to another woman. I could barely look at him. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever experienced. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Every time I saw my dad, I felt like I was going to explode. But I didn't. I couldn't bring myself to confront him. I kept telling myself that maybe, just maybe, there was a reasonable explanation for all of this. Maybe it wasn't as bad as it seemed. But deep down, I knew that wasn't true. About a week later, I decided I couldn't keep this to myself anymore. I called my sister, we'll call her Sarah, and told her everything. I was terrified. I didn't know how she'd react. I mean, this was our dad. But to my surprise, she wasn't shocked. She was angry, yes, but not shocked. She told me she'd suspected something was going on for a while. She'd noticed Dad acting weird, disappearing for long periods of time, coming up with excuses for why he couldn't make it to family events. She'd even caught him on the phone once, talking to someone in a way that didn't sit right with her. But she never had any proof, so she didn't say anything. Now, with what I'd found, she was convinced. We made a plan. We decided that we needed to confront Dad together, as a united front. But before we did that, we needed more information. We needed to be sure. So, we started digging. We went through his emails, his phone records, everything we could find. And what we found was even worse than I imagined. It wasn't just one woman. It was multiple. My dad had been seeing several women, all behind my mom's back. Some of the relationships had been going on for years. He had entire parts of his life that he'd kept hidden from us, from everyone. He had a second phone, a separate email account. He even had another apartment in the city that none of us knew about. The more we uncovered, the more disgusted I became. This wasn't just an affair. This was a double life. I didn't recognize the man we were finding out about. He wasn't the dad who raised me, who taught me right from wrong. He wasn't the man who told me to always be honest, to treat people with respect. He was a stranger, a liar, and the worst part was, he didn't even seem to care. In the emails and texts we found, he talked about my mom like she was some burden, like she was in the way of his real life. It made me sick. Finally, Sarah and I decided we couldn't wait any longer. We had to confront him. So, one night, we sat him down. We told him we knew everything. At first, he denied it. He tried to play it off, saying we were mistaken, that it wasn't what it looked like. But we didn't back down. We showed him the emails, the photos, the proof we'd found. And finally, he broke. I'll never forget the look on his face when he realized he was caught. It wasn't anger or fear. It was relief. Like he was glad it was finally out in the open. He didn't try to explain himself. He didn't apologize. He just sat there, staring at the floor, while Sarah and I yelled at him, demanded answers. But there were no answers. He'd been lying to us for years, and there was no excuse for that. After that, everything fell apart. My mom found out, of course. We had to tell her. She was devastated. She kicked him out of the house, filed for divorce. The family I thought I knew, the family I grew up in, was gone. And my relationship with my dad? It's complicated, to say the least. We barely talk now. I still can't look at him the same way. Every time I do, all I see is the man who lied to me, to all of us, for so long. I wish I could say that I've moved on, that I've forgiven him, but the truth is, I don't know if I ever will. I don't know if I'll ever be able to trust him again. And that hurts. It hurts more than I can put into words. Because no matter how much he's hurt us, he's still my dad. And that's the hardest part of all. Story 4. I found my dad's secret life after he passed away. Growing up, I idolized my dad. He was the kind of man who commanded attention the moment he walked into a room. With his booming laugh and larger-than-life personality, he was the heart of every family gathering, the kind of father you couldn't help but look up to. He worked hard, provided for our family, and made sure that my brother and I never wanted for anything. My dad was my hero, and I was certain I knew everything about him until the day he passed away. It was sudden. He was gone in the blink of an eye, and none of us were ready for it. A heart attack, the doctors said. He was healthy, active, and in the prime of his life, or so we thought. His passing hit us like a freight train, and for weeks we were numb. My mom tried to stay strong, but I could see the cracks in her facade. My brother dealt with it in his own way, withdrawing into his work. And me? I buried myself in memories, in the things he left behind, hoping to find comfort in the traces of him that still lingered in our home. After the funeral, we started going through his belongings, a painful process that no one ever really prepares for. We found the usual things, old family photos, his favorite records, letters, and cards we had written him over the years. It was bittersweet, but also strangely comforting, until we stumbled upon something that made me question everything I thought I knew about my father. In the attic, hidden in the far corner beneath a pile of dusty boxes, I found an old, worn leather-bound journal. It didn't have a title or any identifying marks, but something about it felt off. I didn't recognize it, and neither did my brother or my mom. It wasn't something we had ever seen him write in before. My dad wasn't much of a journal keeper, or so I had thought. He lived his life out loud. He didn't seem like the kind of person who would tuck his thoughts away in a hidden book. Curiosity got the better of me. I opened it, expecting to find maybe old notes or musings from his younger days, maybe a collection of memories he wanted to preserve. But what I found was far from what I had anticipated. As I flipped through the first few pages, I realized this journal was much more than a collection of memories. It was a record of a life I never knew my father had. The first entry was dated nearly 25 years ago, around the time my brother was born. It started innocuously enough. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I froze. My dad, the man who had always seemed so in control, so sure of himself, was writing about struggling. I read on, hoping to find some sort of explanation. The entries were sporadic, and it quickly became clear that this journal wasn't a day-to-day account of his life. Instead, it was more of a confessional, a place where he poured out his thoughts when they became too heavy to carry. He wrote about pressures at work, about feeling like he wasn't living up to the expectations of being the perfect husband, father, and provider. But there was something else, something darker lingering beneath the surface, something he never let any of us see. The nights are the hardest, one entry read. I look at them, at my family, my wife, my kids, and I wonder how I got here. How did I let this happen? I love them, God, I love them so much. But there's something missing, something I can't ignore anymore. That line stopped me cold. What could possibly be missing? He had everything, a loving family, a stable career, a beautiful home. What could he have possibly felt was missing? As I continued reading, the entries became more cryptic. My dad wrote about feeling trapped, about wanting to escape a life he felt wasn't entirely his. He mentioned names, people I didn't recognize, and places he had gone that I had never heard of. There were gaps in time, months, sometimes even years between entries. And each time he returned to the journal, his words became more desperate. I met her again today, one entry read. I don't know why I keep doing this. I know it's wrong, but I can't stay away. She understands me in a way no one else does. She makes me feel alive again. I felt sick. Who was he talking about? Was my dad having an affair? It didn't seem possible. He loved my mom, adored her. I had never seen anything to suggest otherwise. They were the couple everyone else envied, the kind of love story that seemed unbreakable. I kept reading, but the entries didn't offer any clear answers. He never mentioned a name, never provided enough details to figure out who she was or what exactly was going on. The journal felt like a puzzle, one that only my dad knew how to solve. I spent the next few days obsessively going through his things, searching for any clues that might explain what I had found in that journal. I couldn't stop thinking about it, couldn't reconcile the man I thought I knew with the man who had written those words. Every corner of the house felt like it was hiding something, some secret piece of his life that I had been blind to. One night, while digging through an old file cabinet in his home office, I found something that made my heart stop, a key. It was taped to the inside of a folder, labeled with the name of a storage unit I didn't recognize. I knew my dad had kept some things in storage, but I always assumed it was just old work equipment or seasonal items, things that didn't fit in the house anymore. But something about this key felt different. Without telling my mom or my brother, I decided to check it out. The next morning, I drove to the address listed on the folder. It was an old, run-down storage facility on the outskirts of town, one of those places you wouldn't give a second glance to if you passed it on the highway. My hand shook as I inserted the key into the lock, my mind racing with possibilities. What could my dad have hidden here? Was it something that would give me answers, or was I about to uncover more questions? The storage unit was small, about the size of a walk-in closet. Inside, it was surprisingly empty, just a few boxes stacked neatly against the wall. For a moment, I wondered if I had built this up in my head, if maybe I had let my imagination run wild. But then I opened the first box. Inside were photos. Dozens of them. At first, they seemed normal enough, pictures of my dad at various stages of his life, some with my mom, some with my brother and me. But as I sifted through them, I noticed something strange. There were entire stretches of his life that I didn't recognize. Photos of him in places I had never seen, with people I didn't know. And then I found it, the first picture of her. She was young, maybe in her mid-30s, with dark hair and a wide smile. My dad was standing next to her, his arm casually draped over her shoulder, a grin on his face that I had never seen before. It was the smile of a man who was completely, utterly content. I flipped the photo over, searching for any identifying marks, but there was nothing, no date, no name, just a blank space. As I continued to dig through the boxes, I found more photos of them together. In some, they were laughing. In others, they were standing close, their bodies angled toward each other in a way that felt intimate. I couldn't breathe. My dad had a whole life outside of us, a life I had never known about. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. I found letters, handwritten notes that confirmed what I had feared. My dad had been having an affair, and it had gone on for years. The letters were filled with declarations of love, with promises of a future together. He wrote about how hard it was to balance his two lives, about the guilt he felt, but also about how he couldn't bring himself to walk away from her. I can't leave them, one letter read. But I can't let you go, either. You're the only thing that makes me feel like myself. I wanted to scream, to cry, to throw something. My dad had lied to us. He had lied to me. The man I thought I knew, the man I had looked up to, had been living a double life for most of my childhood. How could he do this? How could he betray us like that? But as the anger simmered inside me, something else began to take its place. I started to wonder about my mom, Did she know? Had she suspected? Or had she been just as blind to this as I was? I took the letters and the photos back home, unsure of what to do with them. I couldn't bring myself to confront my mom, not yet, anyway. I needed to understand more before I could break her heart with the truth. So I did the only thing I could think of. I went back to my dad's journal. There were only a few entries left, but they were the most revealing ones yet. In the final pages, my dad wrote about how torn he felt. He loved us, his family, but he also loved her. He wrote about how he had tried, again and again, to end things, but every time he did, something pulled him back to her. I know what I'm doing is wrong, one of the last entries read. But I can't help it. She's the only thing that feels real anymore. The last entry was dated just a few months before he passed away. It was short, just a few lines, but it was enough to make my stomach drop. I can't keep this up. I have to make a choice. But I don't know if I have the strength to do it. And that was it. No explanation, no resolution, just a man trapped between two lives, unable to fully commit to either. I spent the next few weeks in a fog, unsure of how to move forward. Part of me wanted to confront my mom, to tell her everything I had found. But another part of me, the part that still saw my dad as the hero of my childhood, wanted to protect her from the truth. I didn't want to destroy the memory of the man she loved, the man we all loved. Eventually, I decided that some things were better left buried. I packed the photos, the letters, and the journal back into the box and returned it to the storage unit. I locked the door and walked away, leaving my dad's secret life where it belonged, in the past. I'll never know if my mom knew, or if she ever suspected. I don't know if my dad would have eventually told us the truth, or if he planned to take his secret to the grave. But what I do know is that people are complicated. My dad wasn't perfect, none of us are. He made mistakes, and he hurt people, but he was also a man who loved deeply, who wanted to be the best version of himself, even if he didn't always succeed. In the end, I chose to remember the good parts of him, the man who laughed loudly, who danced in the kitchen with my mom, who stayed up late helping me with school projects. I chose to hold on to those memories, even as I carried the weight of his secrets. Because in the end, we're all just trying to find our way through life, stumbling and making mistakes along the way. And maybe that's the hardest part of losing someone, realizing that they were just as flawed and human as the rest of us. Story 5. I moved back home to care for my dying mother, only to discover her terrible secret. Moving back home was never part of the plan. When I graduated college, I envisioned my life unfolding in the vibrant city, climbing the corporate ladder, making new friends, and living independently. I was ready to take on the world. But life has a way of throwing curveballs, and mine came in the form of a phone call that changed everything. It was a regular Wednesday morning when I received the news. My younger sister, Mia, called me while I was getting ready for work. Her voice trembled as she spoke, a stark contrast to the carefree days of our childhood. "You need to come home, Jamie. It's Mom. She's sick. Really sick." I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew my mother had been dealing with health issues for a while. She'd mentioned fatigue and some unexplained weight loss during our last phone call, but I never thought it was this serious. "What do you mean?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "She has cancer," Mia said, her voice breaking. "Stage 4. The doctors say it's spreading, and they don't think she has much time left." The world around me faded. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. The thought of losing my mother, the person who had always been my rock, was unbearable. "I'm on my way," I said, already grabbing my keys and heading for the door. The drive back to my childhood home felt surreal. Memories flooded my mind, summer afternoons spent in the backyard, family dinners filled with laughter, the smell of my mother's cooking wafting through the house. But now, everything felt different. The house was no longer just a sanctuary. It had become a place shadowed by uncertainty and grief. When I arrived, the atmosphere was heavy. Mia was waiting for me outside, her face pale and drawn. We hugged tightly, and I could feel her shaking. She's in the living room, Mia said, her voice barely above a whisper. I can't believe this is happening. As I walked through the door, I was struck by the sight of my mother, once so full of life, now frail and weak. She was lying on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, her once vibrant hair now dull and thinning. She looked up as I entered, her eyes lighting up momentarily. Jamie, you're here, she said, her voice soft but filled with warmth. Hey, Mom, I replied, forcing a smile as I fought back tears. I knelt beside her, taking her hand in mine. It felt so fragile, so unlike the strong grip I had known all my life. How are you feeling? Oh, she said, attempting to sound cheerful, just trying to take it one day at a time. We spent the evening talking, reminiscing about the past, and trying to hold on to the moments that still felt precious. But the weight of reality hung heavily over us. As the days turned into weeks, I settled into a new routine of caring for my mother. I helped her with her medications, prepared her meals, and sat by her side as she napped. I tried to be strong for her, to keep the atmosphere light, but there were moments when the sadness would seep through, and I would catch her staring out the window, lost in thought. One night, as I was getting ready for bed, I heard my mother talking softly in the living room. I stepped out to see what was happening, and as I approached, I realized she was on the phone. I could hear snippets of her conversation. I promise I'll handle it. Just give me a little more time. My heart raced. What was she talking about? I hesitated, unsure if I should interrupt. But my curiosity got the better of me. I cleared my throat softly, and she quickly ended the call, a look of panic crossing her face. Oh, Jamie, I didn't realize you were up. What were you talking about? I asked, trying to keep my tone light. But the tension in the air was palpable. Just some old friends, she replied, avoiding my gaze. Mom, you don't have to hide things from me. I'm here to help you. I want to know. She sighed deeply, as if weighing her options. It's nothing you need to worry about, she insisted, but I could see the stress etched on her face. After that night, I became more aware of her behavior. There were more late-night phone calls, hushed conversations, and a nervous energy that seemed to surround her. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I wanted to trust her, but I also felt this urge to dig deeper. One evening, as I was tidying up her room, I stumbled upon a small notebook hidden beneath her bed. My heart raced as I opened it. The pages were filled with names, dates, and strange symbols. There were lists of things, appointments, meetings, payments. I flipped through the pages, trying to make sense of it all, but it only raised more questions. Who were these people? What was my mother involved in? I felt a mix of betrayal and fear. Was my mother involved in something illegal? Was this connected to her illness? I needed answers. The next day, I approached her again, this time with the notebook in hand. Mom, we need to talk, I said firmly. Her expression shifted immediately, a flash of fear crossing her face. What did you find? This, I said, holding up the notebook. What is this? Who are all these people? She hesitated, her eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape. It's complicated, Jamie. You don't understand. Then help me understand. I'm not a kid anymore. I deserve to know what's going on. With a heavy sigh, she finally relented. Okay, but you have to promise not to judge me. I nodded, feeling a mix of anxiety and anticipation. I've been keeping something from you and Mia for a long time. When your father passed away, things got hard. I was left with a lot of debt, and I didn't know how to manage it. I was desperate, and that's when I got involved with some people who promised to help me. My heart sank. Help you how? Money, Jamie. Loans that I could never repay. But they're not just ordinary loans. These people, they're dangerous. I thought I could get out, but they just kept pulling me deeper in. The weight of her words hung in the air. Are you telling me you've been involved with criminals? I asked, trying to comprehend the situation. It's not that simple. I was scared, and I didn't know what else to do. They offered me money, but the interest rates were insane. I've been trying to pay them off, but it's like a never-ending cycle. I felt a surge of anger. Mom, you should have told me. We could have figured this out together. I was trying to protect you. I didn't want you to worry. I thought I could handle it, but now I'm in over my head. As she spoke, I noticed tears welling in her eyes. What do they want from you? They want their money. And they've started threatening me, and I'm terrified. My heart raced. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. We need to go to the police, I said firmly. No. You don't understand. If I do that, they'll come after us. They'll hurt us. I can't let that happen. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. My mother, the strong woman I had always admired, was now vulnerable and afraid. I wanted to help her, but I felt so helpless. In the weeks that followed, our lives became a whirlwind of fear and anxiety. I tried to keep things as normal as possible for Mia, but it was difficult. I spent sleepless nights worrying about my mother's safety, wondering how deep the rabbit hole went. I tried to convince her to get help, to talk to someone who could guide us through this mess, but she was adamant about keeping it a secret. One night, after a particularly stressful day, I woke up to the sound of a car pulling into the driveway. I rushed to the window and saw two men get out. They looked rough, like they meant business. My heart raced as I ran to my mother's room and shook her awake. Mom, someone's here. You need to hide. She bolted upright, panic etched on her face. What? Who? Those men I saw. I think they're here for you. Without hesitation, she leaped out of bed and rushed to the closet, motioning for me to follow. We huddled together, barely breathing as we listened to the footsteps approaching the front door. I could hear my heart pounding in my ears. The door creaked open, and I held my breath. I could hear muffled voices, low and threatening. We need to talk to her. Where is she? My mother squeezed my hand tightly, fear radiating off her. I felt like we were in a nightmare, trapped and unable to escape. After what felt like an eternity, the men finally left. As soon as they were gone, we emerged from the closet, and I couldn't hold back my anger any longer. This is insane. We can't keep living like this. We need to do something. My mother looked defeated. I don't know what else to do, Jamie. I'm so sorry. I thought I could manage, but it's all falling apart. That night, I couldn't sleep. I was exhausted, emotionally drained from the turmoil of the past few weeks. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every moment in my mind. I felt a mixture of rage and compassion for my mother. How had we ended up in this situation? The next day, I made a decision. I would take matters into my own hands. I began researching the people my mother had been involved with, trying to gather information on them. I discovered that they were part of a loan sharking operation, preying on vulnerable people like my mom. I knew we needed to find a way out of this mess before it was too late. With this new information, I approached my mother again. Mom, I think I can help us. I've learned about these people, and I have a plan. What kind of plan? She asked, her voice tinged with skepticism. I'm going to confront them. I'll let them know that we can't pay any more money, and that we're going to the authorities if they don't leave us alone. Are you insane? She exclaimed. They'll kill you. You don't know what you're dealing with. I have to try, Mom. We can't live in fear forever. It's time to take back control. After much convincing, she reluctantly agreed to let me try. I spent days gathering information about the men who had been threatening her, learning their names, and mapping out their territory. The closer I got, the more I realized the danger we were in. But I felt a sense of determination, the drive to protect my family at all costs. The day finally came when I decided to confront them. I drove to their meeting spot, an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of town. My heart pounded as I stepped inside, the musty air wrapping around me like a shroud. I spotted them huddled together, counting money and laughing. I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what was about to happen. "Hey," I called out, my voice echoing in the cavernous space. They turned to look at me, surprise etched on their faces. "What do you want?" one of them smeared, his tattoos stretching across his arms like a warning. "I'm here about my mother," I said, trying to sound confident despite the fear gnawing at my insides. "She can't pay you anymore. You need to leave her alone." Laughter erupted among the group, and I felt a surge of anger. "You think you can just waltz in here and tell us what to do?" another man taunted. "Your mother owes us, and we don't forget debts." "I'm not afraid of you," I shot back, though my voice trembled slightly. "You're nothing but a bunch of thugs, and I will go to the police if you don't stop threatening her." The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging in the air. For a moment, I thought I might actually stand a chance. But then the main guy stepped forward, a menacing grin spreading across his face. "You think this is a game? We'll do whatever it takes to get what we're owed. And if you keep poking your nose where it doesn't belong, you'll regret it." With that, I turned to leave, my heart racing. I knew I had taken a risk by confronting them, but I felt a sense of empowerment. I wouldn't let them control our lives any longer. When I got home, my mother was waiting for me, her expression a mix of worry and relief. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. I confronted them, I admitted, my heart still racing from the encounter. They didn't take it well. But I stood my ground, Mom. I'm not going to let them bully us anymore. Jamie, you shouldn't have done that. They'll come after us. They're dangerous. I know, but we can't live in fear forever. We have to find a way out of this. From that moment on, we worked together to gather evidence against them. I documented everything I could, texts, emails, photos, anything that could help build a case. We contacted local authorities, explaining our situation and providing them with the evidence we had collected. It was terrifying, but it felt like we were finally taking steps towards regaining our lives. Weeks turned into months as we navigated the legal process. There were moments of doubt, times when I questioned if we were doing the right thing. The fear of retaliation loomed over us, and my mother's health continued to decline. But we were determined to see it through. Finally, we received a call from the authorities. They had gathered enough evidence to take action against the loan sharking operation. I felt a mix of relief and anxiety wash over me. We had done it, we had taken a stand. But I also knew that this was just the beginning. The day of the raid felt surreal. We were told to stay in a safe location while the police executed the operation. I could hardly breathe, my heart racing as we waited for news. Finally, I received a call from the authorities, letting us know that they had arrested several members of the operation and that our case had been taken seriously. When I shared the news with my mother, her face lit up for the first time in weeks. "You did it, Jamie. You really did it." I hugged her tightly, feeling a rush of emotion. We had fought back against the darkness, and for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. As my mother's health continued to decline, we made the most of the time we had left together. We talked about everything, her hopes, her dreams, the regrets she had about her past decisions. It was bittersweet, but I cherished those moments, knowing that we were finally being honest with each other. When she passed away a few months later, I felt a profound sense of loss, but also a sense of peace. I knew that she had fought bravely, and that we had stood by each other through the darkest times. I vowed to carry her memory with me, to live a life that honored her strength and resilience. Moving back home had changed my life in ways I could never have anticipated. I learned about the complexities of adulthood, the fragility of life, and the importance of facing our fears. My mother may have left this world, but her spirit lived on in the lessons she had taught me, and in the love we shared during those final days. As I stood at her grave, I whispered a promise to her. I would never let fear dictate my life again. I would honor her memory by living boldly, by helping others who found themselves in similar situations. I was forever changed, but I would carry her strength with me wherever I went. And that, I realized, was the greatest gift she had given me, the courage to face whatever life threw my way, and the understanding that love transcends even the greatest challenges. Story 6. I uncovered my wife's hidden past, and it shattered my trust. For most of my life, I've been a straightforward guy. I believe in honesty, loyalty, and the idea that everyone has a story worth hearing. It's one of the things that drew me to my wife, Emily. From the moment we met, I was captivated by her warmth, her kindness, and her ability to make everyone feel comfortable around her. We seemed like the perfect match. Our relationship was filled with laughter, adventure, and dreams for the future. I genuinely thought I knew everything about her. Little did I know, there were pieces of her past she had kept hidden away, and discovering them would change everything I thought I knew about our life together. It all began on an ordinary Thursday evening. Emily and I had just returned from a family dinner at my parents' house. As we settled in for the night, I noticed she seemed a little off. Usually, after a long dinner filled with family stories and laughter, she'd be bubbling with excitement, but tonight she was quiet, lost in thought. I figured she was just tired, but something in my gut told me there was more to it. As the night went on, I tried to engage her in conversation, asking her about her day, our plans for the weekend, anything to get her talking. But she was distant, responding with one-word answers. Finally, I decided to let her be. Maybe she just needed some time alone. I went to the living room to watch some TV, hoping she'd join me once she was ready. But she didn't. Hours passed, and I could hear her moving around in our bedroom, wrestling through drawers. A sense of unease crept over me. I knew Emily well enough to know when something was bothering her, and it was becoming increasingly clear that this wasn't just a passing mood. Around midnight, I went to bed, and she was still awake, sitting on the edge of the bed with her back to me. I could see the glow of her phone screen illuminating her face. "Hey, everything okay?" I asked softly. She turned to me, a mix of emotions in her eyes, frustration, sadness, maybe even fear. "I'm fine," she replied, but I could hear the tremor in her voice. I sat up, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on us. "You don't look fine. Something's wrong." After a long silence, she finally sighed and said, "There's something I need to tell you. Something from my past that I've kept hidden." My heart raced. I had never seen Emily look so vulnerable before. I felt a mix of concern and curiosity. "What is it?" I asked, bracing myself for whatever revelation was coming my way. She paused, her hands trembling slightly as she held her phone. "You remember when I told you I had a difficult childhood? It was a lot harder than I let on. My family moved around a lot, and I was never really able to make friends. But there's something else. Something I never told you because I was afraid of how you'd react." As she spoke, I felt a knot form in my stomach. "What is it, Emily?" I urged her gently. "You can tell me anything." Taking a deep breath, she finally said, "I was involved in some things that I'm not proud of. When I was younger, I made some terrible choices. I got mixed up with the wrong crowd, and there were times when I broke the law. I've done things I wish I could take back." The words hung heavy in the air. I felt as if the ground had shifted beneath my feet. I never imagined my wife, the woman I loved and trusted, had a past like this. "What kind of things?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked away, tears welling in her eyes. "I was involved in shoplifting, partying with people who had bad influences, and I even spent a short time in juvenile detention. It was a dark period for me, and I've worked hard to move past it. I didn't want you to see me as that person, so I kept it hidden." I could see the anguish in her expression, the fear of rejection that loomed in her voice. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her that everyone makes mistakes. But my mind was racing with questions. How could she keep this from me? Did she think I wouldn't love her if I knew? As I processed her words, I felt anger begin to rise within me. Not at her, but at the thought of her hiding such a significant part of herself. "Emily, why didn't you tell me sooner? We've been together for years. This is something I should have known about you." I was scared, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I didn't want you to see me differently. I worked so hard to create a new life for myself, to be a better person. I thought if I just kept it buried, it would stay in the past. I thought I could protect you from who I used to be. The pain in her voice broke my heart. I could see that this was a struggle she had been dealing with alone. But at the same time, I felt betrayed. It wasn't just about her past, it was about trust. You should have trusted me enough to tell me, I replied, my voice shaking slightly. I can't believe you felt like you had to hide this from me. She looked down, tears streaming down her cheeks. I know, and I'm so sorry. I just didn't want to burden you with my mistakes. I thought you would see me differently, and I couldn't bear the thought of losing you. For a moment, we sat in silence, both lost in our thoughts. I tried to wrap my head around everything she had shared, but the reality of it all was overwhelming. I loved Emily deeply, but this new information felt like a wedge driving between us. Eventually, I spoke again. So what happens now? I mean, how do we move forward from this? Emily wiped her tears and looked up at me, vulnerability etched in her features. I don't know. I just want you to understand that I've changed. I'm not that person anymore. I've spent years trying to be better, trying to live a life I can be proud of. I love you, and I want to build a future with you, but I know this is a lot to process. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. I believe you, Emily. I do. But trust is earned, and this is a lot for me to digest. I just need time. She nodded, understanding. I get it. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to protect what we have. That night was filled with an awkward tension, and sleep eluded me. My mind raced with thoughts of Emily's past, wondering how it could change my perception of her. I tossed and turned, grappling with feelings of betrayal, confusion, and love all at once. How could I reconcile the woman I knew with the one who had hidden such a significant part of her life? The next few days were emotionally charged. I put on a brave face during the day, going through the motions of work and daily life, but inside, I was still wrestling with my feelings. I would catch myself staring at Emily, searching for signs of the woman she had been, trying to reconcile that version of her with the woman I loved. At night, I'd lie awake, replaying our conversation in my mind. It was clear that she was ashamed of her past, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it than she had let on. Why had she gotten involved with the wrong crowd in the first place? What had driven her to those choices? One evening, I decided to confront her again. We sat down in the living room, and I gently asked, Emily, do you think you could share more about what happened back then? I need to understand why you made those choices. She took a deep breath, and I could see the tension in her shoulders. I guess I just felt lost. My family life wasn't perfect. My parents fought a lot, and I often felt invisible. When I met those people, they made me feel accepted. I wanted to belong to something, even if it was destructive. It was a way to escape my reality. I listened intently, realizing that her past wasn't just a series of poor decisions. It was a reflection of her struggles and vulnerabilities. It was hard to hear, but I felt a glimmer of understanding. Emily, I can see how that would have been difficult for you. It's important to know that you don't have to hide your past from me. I want to understand you fully. She nodded, tears in her eyes again. Thank you for saying that. I really didn't want to burden you with my past. I wanted to be someone you could be proud of. As the days turned into weeks, we began to navigate the rocky waters of Emily's past together. We talked more openly about her experiences, and with each conversation, I felt a layer of the wall between us crumble. I could see the relief in her eyes as she shared her story, as if a burden had been lifted. But trust is a delicate thing, and I was still struggling to reconcile her past with my love for her. I started to notice subtle changes in our relationship. I was more protective of her, always questioning her choices, even when they were innocent. I found myself feeling insecure, worried that she might slip back into those old habits or find solace in someone else who understood her past. One afternoon, I overheard her on the phone with a friend, laughing and chatting about old times. A wave of jealousy washed over me, and I felt my stomach twist. I didn't want to feel that way, but I couldn't help it. I approached her, my heart racing. "Who were you talking to?" She looked at me, surprise in her eyes. "Just Rachel. We were talking about old friends from high school." "Why?" I could feel the heat rise in my cheeks. "I don't know. It just made me nervous. You talked about your past, and now it feels like it's creeping back into our life." Emily sighed, her expression turning serious. "I understand that you're struggling with this, but I need you to trust me. I've worked so hard to move past that part of my life. I don't want to go back to it, and I don't want to lose you either." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I realized that my fear and jealousy were stemming from my own insecurities rather than her actions. She was right. She had changed, and I needed to trust that she wasn't going back to who she used to be. As the months passed, we continued to work through our challenges. It wasn't always easy, but we learned to communicate openly. I began to understand that her past didn't define her. It was a part of her journey that had shaped who she had become. Emily took steps to reinforce her commitment to our relationship. She joined a support group for individuals with similar experiences, where she found a community of people who understood her struggles. It was inspiring to watch her embrace her past and use it as a platform for personal growth. In turn, I worked on my own issues, seeking therapy to help me deal with my trust issues and feelings of inadequacy. I learned that it was okay to feel vulnerable and that my worth wasn't tied to Emily's past decisions. One evening, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, I turned to her and said, "I just want you to know how proud I am of you. You've come so far, and I admire your strength." Emily smiled, her eyes shining with appreciation. "Thank you. That means everything to me. I want to be the person you believe I am. I want to build a future together, one where we can both be our true selves." At that moment, I realized that our relationship had transformed into something stronger than before. We had faced the storm together, and though it had tested us, it had also brought us closer. I learned to appreciate her resilience, her ability to rise from her past, and I found solace in the fact that we could face anything together. As the years went by, Emily and I built a life rooted in honesty and understanding. We faced challenges like any couple, but we always returned to the foundation we had created, one built on trust, communication, and love. I came to understand that everyone has a past, and it's the journey we take to move forward that truly matters. Emily became a source of inspiration for me. She turned her struggles into lessons, and we often talked about the importance of being honest with ourselves and each other. Her past became a part of our story, but it was no longer a burden. Instead, it served as a reminder of how far we had come together. Through it all, I learned that love isn't just about accepting someone's flaws, it's about supporting each other as we grow and change. And in that process, I found a deeper love for Emily than I ever thought possible. In the end, her hidden past didn't shatter our trust, it strengthened it, teaching us the value of vulnerability and the power of sharing our truths. And for that, I would always be grateful. Story 7. I thought I knew my best friend, but I discovered his dark secret. It's funny how life can change in the blink of an eye. One moment, you're cruising through your day-to-day routine, and the next, you find yourself standing at a crossroads, faced with a truth you never saw coming. This is the story of how I discovered my best friend Mark had been living a double life, and how that revelation shattered everything I thought I knew about him. Mark and I met in college, where we bonded over a shared love for music and movies. We were inseparable, spending late nights jamming in his dorm room, sharing our dreams, and talking about life. He was the kind of guy who could light up a room with his humor and charisma. I always admired his confidence and how easily he connected with people. In many ways, he was the brother I never had, and I felt lucky to have him in my life. After college, we both landed jobs in the same city and decided to live together in a modest apartment. Life was good. We shared everything, our victories, our struggles, and even our heartbreaks. But beneath the laughter and camaraderie, there were glimpses of something deeper, a shadow that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Looking back, I should have noticed the signs. Mark had always been a bit secretive about his family. He rarely spoke of them, and when he did, it was often in vague terms. "They're complicated," he would say, shrugging it off. I respected his privacy and never pressed him for details, believing everyone has their reasons for keeping certain things close to the chest. But as the years rolled on, Mark began to change. It started subtly. He would occasionally cancel plans at the last minute, claiming he had to handle personal matters. I could see the worry in his eyes when he thought I wasn't looking. It was as if he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders, and I felt helpless, unable to reach him. Then one day, everything came to a head. It was a Saturday, and we had planned to hit the beach with some friends. I was excited, ready to soak up the sun and unwind. But when I woke up that morning, Mark was already gone. His room was empty, and I couldn't find a note or a message. Confused and a little worried, I called his phone, but it went straight to voicemail. After a few hours, I decided to check in with a few mutual friends, thinking maybe they had seen him. When I reached out to Lisa, one of our close friends, she seemed equally concerned. He didn't say anything to me, but he mentioned something about needing to take care of family stuff, she said. That was the same excuse he had used before, but it felt different this time. As the day dragged on, I felt an unsettling feeling growing in the pit of my stomach. Mark was never one to just disappear. After waiting for hours with no word from him, I decided to take matters into my own hands. I drove to his family's house, a small place on the outskirts of town that I had never visited before. When I arrived, the atmosphere was tense. The house looked old and worn down, but I could see movement through the curtains. I knocked hesitantly on the door, my heart racing. A woman opened the door, her eyes widening in surprise when she saw me. "Hi, I'm looking for Mark." "Is he here?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The woman's expression shifted from surprise to concern as she stepped aside to let me in. "You must be his friend." "I'm his mother," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Is everything okay?" "He hasn't answered my calls." Her eyes glistened with tears, and she looked away for a moment, taking a deep breath. "He's been going through a lot, and we're all trying to support him. But he's been distant. I'm worried." Those words sent chills down my spine. "What do you mean distant? What's going on?" Just then, Mark appeared at the end of the hallway, his expression a mix of surprise and dread. "What are you doing here?" he asked, his voice low. "I came to see you, man." "You disappeared, and I was worried," I replied, trying to gauge his mood. He looked at his mother, then back at me, a battle of emotions playing out in his eyes. "Can we talk in private?" he finally said, leading me to a small room at the back of the house. As we settled into the cramped space, the air felt thick with tension. "Look, I know you've been dealing with something." "I just want to help you," I said, keeping my tone gentle. Mark sighed, running his hands through his hair. "I didn't want you to see me like this. I didn't want you to know about my family, my past." "Your past? What do you mean?" He took a deep breath, and for the first time I saw a flicker of vulnerability in his eyes. "I've been trying to escape it. My family has a history that I'm not proud of. My father, he's in prison for a crime he didn't commit, and it's been tearing us apart. I've been trying to help my mom keep everything together, but it's hard." I was stunned into silence. Mark had always been the strong one, the guy who could handle anything. I never imagined he was dealing with something so heavy. "I'm so sorry, Mark. Why didn't you tell me?" "I would have been there for you," I said, my heart aching for my friend. "I didn't want to drag you into my mess. I thought I could handle it on my own, but it's been eating me alive," he admitted, his voice cracking. That's when he revealed the full extent of his family's situation. His father had been wrongfully accused of a crime he didn't commit, embezzlement, and had spent years in prison fighting to clear his name. The stress had taken a toll on Mark's family, and his mother was struggling to keep everything afloat. Mark had taken on the responsibility of being the pillar of strength for his family, but it was clear he was buckling under the pressure. "Why didn't you ever ask for help?" I pressed gently, wanting to understand how he had ended up so far down this. "I thought I could fix everything myself. I didn't want to burden you with my problems." "I was ashamed," he replied, his eyes downcast. "Mark, you're not a burden. Friends are supposed to lean on each other during tough times," I said firmly. "You shouldn't have to go through this alone." He looked at me, a mixture of gratitude and sorrow in his eyes. "I know, and I'm sorry for pushing you away. I didn't mean to. I just didn't want you to see me as weak." In that moment, I realized how deeply he had internalized his family's struggles. It wasn't just about the crime, it was about the stigma that came with it. Mark was worried about being judged, and I understood that fear all too well. After that day, I made it my mission to support Mark. We began having regular talks about his family, the challenges they faced, and the steps we could take to help. I reached out to my network, looking for legal resources that could assist his father in clearing his name. It felt good to take action, to help him navigate the turmoil that had consumed his life. But even as we worked together, I could see the toll it was taking on Mark. The stress was evident in the bags under his eyes, the way his smile no longer reached his eyes. He would often fall into a spiral of worry, fearing for his father's future and the impact it would have on their family. One evening, I suggested we go out for drinks, hoping to lighten the mood and give him a break from reality. We headed to our favorite bar, where we had spent countless nights laughing and sharing stories. As we settled into our seats, I ordered us a couple of beers, trying to create a more relaxed atmosphere. "Let's forget about everything for a night," I said, raising my glass. "To friendship." He clinked his glass against mine, a small smile breaking through his facade. "To friendship." We chatted about everything from work to our favorite movies, and for a moment it felt like old times. But as the night wore on, I could sense that Mark was still preoccupied. He would often stare off into the distance, lost in thought. "Hey, what's on your mind?" I asked gently. He hesitated, his brow furrowed. "I just feel so helpless. I'm trying to support my mom, and it's exhausting. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough." "Mark, you're doing everything you can. You're there for her emotionally, and that counts for a lot. It's not your fault that the situation is out of your control," I reassured him. He sighed, taking a long sip from his beer. "I know, but I can't shake this feeling that I should be doing more. I hate feeling powerless. None of us can control everything, Mark. You have to be kind to yourself," I said. "You're not alone in this. I'm here for you." He looked at me, gratitude shining in his eyes. "Thanks for being such a good friend. I don't know what I'd do without you." That night, we shared more than just drinks. We shared our fears, our hopes, and our dreams. It felt like a turning point, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, friendship could light the way. As weeks turned into months, Mark's situation slowly began to improve. With the legal resources I found, they were able to launch an appeal for his father's case. It was a long shot, but at least it felt like there was a glimmer of hope. Mark's mother found support in local groups, where she connected with others who understood their struggles. Still, the road ahead was rocky. There were days when the weight of the world felt like too much for Mark to bear. I would often find him staring blankly at the wall, lost in his thoughts. On those days, I made it a point to check in, to remind him that he was not alone. One evening, we decided to go for a hike to clear our heads. As we trekked up the trail, the cold breeze and stunning views brought a sense of calm. At the summit, we sat down, catching our breath while taking in the beauty of the world around us. "Isn't it crazy how small our problems feel up here?" Mark said, glancing at the horizon. "It really puts things into perspective, doesn't it?" I replied. "We get so caught up in our struggles, but life is so much bigger than that." Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You're right. Sometimes I forget that there's a world outside of this chaos. We sat in silence for a while, letting the serenity of the moment wash over us. It felt healing, like we were recharging our spirits in the midst of everything. As we made our way back down the trail, Mark spoke up, a newfound determination in his voice. I want to take control of my life again. I can't keep letting this situation define me. I smiled, proud of him. That's the spirit. You're more than your circumstances, and you have the strength to rise above them. From that day forward, Mark began to reclaim his life. He started volunteering at a local community center, where he shared his love for music with kids. It became a creative outlet for him, a way to channel his emotions into something positive. The experience helped him heal, and I watched as he transformed from a man weighed down by his past to someone who found purpose in helping others. I was grateful to see the spark return to his eyes, the laughter returning to his voice. As for his father's case, the appeal process took time, but eventually they received good news. They had won the appeal, and his father would be released from prison. The joy and relief that filled Mark's heart were palpable. He called me the moment he received the news, his voice trembling with excitement. I can't believe it. After all this time, he's coming home. I could feel the happiness radiating through the phone. I'm so proud of you, Mark. You did it. You fought for your family. When his father returned home, it was a bittersweet reunion filled with tears and laughter. I stood by Mark's side, witnessing the moment he had fought so hard for. It was a beauty. In the end, Mark and I learned that life is unpredictable, and it often throws challenges our way that we never expect. But through those challenges, we found strength, both in ourselves and in each other. Mark's journey taught me the value of compassion, understanding, and the importance of being there for one another. We both emerged from this experience forever changed, bound together by the trials we had faced and the bond we had forged. As I reflect on our journey, I realize that friendship is about more than just good times. It's about standing by each other during the storms of life. And through it all, I discovered the true meaning of loyalty and love. Mark and I are still close today, and our bond is stronger than ever. We often talk about that challenging time and how it shaped us. And while we both hope to face fewer obstacles in the future, we know we can weather any storm together. Story 8. The day I found out my father wasn't who I thought he was. Growing up, my father was my hero. He was the type of man who could make you feel safe just by being in the room. He worked hard, loved fiercely, and always had a kind word to say. Our family lived a seemingly perfect life in our little suburban neighborhood. However, beneath that facade lay secrets that would change everything I thought I knew about my father. It all began on an ordinary Saturday morning. I woke up to the smell of pancakes wafting through the house, a delightful aroma that always made the weekend feel special. My father was in the kitchen, flipping pancakes with his usual skill, while my mother set the table. It was a routine I had come to cherish, a slice of normalcy I took for granted. As we sat around the table, my parents were particularly animated, discussing plans for an upcoming family trip. But I noticed that my father seemed a bit more distracted than usual. He kept glancing at his phone, a slight frown etched on his face. I shrugged it off, thinking he was just stressed about work. Later that day, my father asked me to help him in the garage. I was excited to spend some time with him, so I eagerly agreed. As we rummaged through old boxes filled with tools and toys from my childhood, I came across an old photo album tucked away in the corner. I pulled it out and flipped through the pages, reminiscing about family vacations and birthdays. Then I stumbled upon a photo that stopped me cold. It was a picture of my father, but he looked different, much younger, and he was standing next to a group of men who appeared to be in military uniforms. Confused, I turned to my father, who was suddenly very tense. "What's this?" I asked, holding up the photo. He looked at it, then quickly looked away, his expression shifting from surprise to something I couldn't quite place. "Oh, that's just an old picture from my past," he said, his voice lacking its usual warmth. "Why have I never seen this before?" I pressed, feeling a strange sense of urgency to know more. Because it's not important, he replied tersely, an edge creeping into his tone that I had never heard before. I felt a knot tightening in my stomach. There was something in his eyes that told me this was more than just an old photo. Dad, why are you acting like this? You can tell me anything. For a moment, he hesitated, and I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. Finally, he sighed, running a hand through his hair. Okay, but this isn't something I'd ever wanted to discuss. It's complicated. I nodded, urging him to continue. He took a deep breath, then began to unravel a story that I had never expected to hear. I was in the military many years ago. I served in a special operations unit. It was a different time, and I was involved in things that I never felt comfortable talking about. My heart raced. What do you mean things? He glanced at me, the shadows of his past flickering in his eyes. There were missions, covert operations. It's not something I'm proud of. I left that life behind for a reason, but it's a part of who I am. I felt a wave of confusion wash over me. My father, the man I had always seen as a gentle, caring figure, had a past filled with secrets and possibly danger. Why didn't you tell us? Why keep this from Mom? He sighed deeply, as if the weight of the world was on his shoulders. I wanted to protect you and your mother. I thought leaving that life behind would be enough, but I see now that the truth is much more complicated. After that day, everything changed. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was living a lie. The man I thought I knew had layers I couldn't comprehend. I began to notice little things, his sudden reactions to loud noises, his discomfort with certain topics on TV, and his insistence on keeping a low profile. It was as if I was looking at a stranger rather than my father. Days turned into weeks, and I found myself increasingly obsessed with uncovering the truth. I began to dig into his past, searching for any records or information that could shed light on the mystery. It wasn't easy. He had been careful to keep his history hidden. However, my determination only grew as I realized there was so much more to discover. One night, I stumbled upon an old newspaper article while searching online. The headline read, "Local Hero Returns from Covert Operation." My heart raced as I read through the article, detailing a dangerous mission my father had been involved in. It talked about a rescue operation that had made headlines, but it also mentioned something that chilled me to the bone, a connection to a criminal organization. My mind raced as I processed the information. How could the man I loved and respected be tied to something so dark? I knew I had to confront him, but fear gripped me. What if I was wrong? What if I was misunderstanding everything? The next day, I approached my father cautiously. "Dad, can we talk?" He looked at me, sensing the gravity in my tone. "Sure, what's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I found something about your past, about your time in the military. There's a lot more than you've told me." His expression darkened, and I could see the tension in his jaw. "What did you find?" I swallowed hard. I read about a rescue operation, but there were mentions of criminal ties. "I don't understand, Dad. What does this mean?" He ran a hand over his face, frustration boiling just beneath the surface. "You don't understand. That was a different time, a different me. I did things I'm not proud of, but I thought I could leave that behind. But you didn't, did you? You never told us the truth," I shot back, feeling anger and confusion collide within me. "I was trying to protect you," he shouted, his voice echoing in the small space. "Protect me from what?" "The true." Silence enveloped us, and I could feel the tension crackling in the air. He was finally looking at me, truly looking at me, and I could see the pain in his eyes. "You have to understand. I thought I could put that life behind me. I thought that once I left the military, I could create a normal life. But the past doesn't just disappear." "What do you mean?" "There are people out there who don't forget. My involvement in that operation made me a target. I had to change my name, sever ties. I was trying to keep you safe. The revelation hit me like a freight train. My father had been living under an alias, hiding from a past that he couldn't escape. It was surreal to think that my childhood had been built on a foundation of lies. So, all this time, you were living in fear? Yes, he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. And I thought I could keep you and your mother safe by hiding the truth. But I see now that keeping secrets has only made things worse. In that moment, I realized the depth of his pain. He had sacrificed so much to protect us, but in doing so, he had created a chasm between us. Dad, I just want you to be honest with me. I need to know who you really are, I pleaded. He nodded slowly, tears glistening in his eyes. I owe you that much. As we talked, he revealed more about his past, about the choices he made, the mistakes he couldn't take back. I listened, my heart breaking for the man who had always been my rock. I began to understand the complexity of his character, the struggles he faced in reconciling his past with the present. Over the following weeks, we slowly began to rebuild our relationship. It wasn't easy. There were moments of anger, confusion, and doubt. But as we navigated the rocky terrain together, I realized that honesty could be a powerful force for healing. My father also decided to take proactive steps to address his past. He reached out to legal resources and began to work on clearing any potential ties to his former life. It was a daunting task, but he was determined to set things right. I joined him in this process, wanting to support him every step of the way. As we worked together, I learned more about the military and the sacrifices made by those who serve. My father opened up about the camaraderie he experienced, the friendships he forged, and the bonds that were created under the most challenging circumstances. I gained a newfound respect for him, understanding that his past was shaped by complex experiences. One evening, we were sitting on the porch, watching the sunset. The colors painted the sky, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of peace. You know, I said, breaking the silence, I wish I could have known this side of you sooner. He turned to me, a smile breaking through the tension. I wish I had shared it with you. I thought I was protecting you, but I see now that the truth is what brings us closer. From that day on, our bond only grew stronger. We started to have more open discussions about life, family, and our dreams for the future. My father also became involved in community service, reaching out to veterans and sharing his experiences with others. He found solace in helping those who faced similar struggles, and I admired him for his courage. We both realized that healing was a journey, and the more we leaned on each other, the more we could navigate the complexities of our lives. As time went on, I learned that the past is a part of who we are, but it doesn't define us. My father became a source of inspiration, showing me that even in the darkest moments, we can choose to move forward with honesty and integrity. I often reflect on that pivotal moment when everything changed. The day I discovered my father's secrets became a turning point in our relationship, a moment of vulnerability that transformed us both. It taught me the importance of communication, the value of trust, and the power of love in overcoming adversity. Now, as I look back on our journey, I'm grateful for the challenges we faced together. It wasn't easy, but it brought us to a place of understanding and acceptance. My father may have had a complicated past, but it shaped him into the man he is today, a man I am proud to call my father. In the end, we learned that life is a tapestry woven with both light and dark threads. The key is to embrace the whole picture, recognizing that our stories, with all their complexities, make us who we are. And through it all, we found that the bonds of family can withstand even the most turbulent storms. Story 9. My best friend became my rival, and it changed everything. Growing up, my best friend Aaron and I were inseparable. We shared everything from our favorite video games to our dreams of making it big in the world of sports. Our days were filled with laughter, and our bond felt unbreakable. But as we transitioned into our teenage years, everything changed in ways I never expected. The shift started subtly. We were both passionate about basketball and played on the same local team. Our coach often praised us as a dynamic duo, noting how well we worked together. But as we approached high school, the competition intensified. New players joined our team, and the pressure to perform was higher than ever. As we entered freshman year, our coach decided to hold tryouts for the starting lineup. The stakes were high, and the two of us found ourselves vying for the same position, point guard. I could feel the tension in the air during practice sessions. What had once been camaraderie now felt like a battle, and I could sense the shift in our relationship. We began to push each other harder than ever. I found myself practicing late into the night, driven by a fierce desire to secure that starting spot. But it seemed like Aaron was doing the same. He was determined, perhaps even more so than I was. The days of us laughing together turned into heated discussions over plays and strategies. The fun we once had faded, replaced by a gnawing rivalry. The day of the tryouts came, and I felt a mixture of excitement and dread. As we faced off during drills, I could see the fire in Aaron's eyes. He wanted it just as badly as I did. When the coach announced the starting lineup, my heart sank. I had secured the point guard position, but it felt hollow. I looked at Aaron, who was visibly crushed. "Congratulations," he said through gritted teeth, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. The way he said it sent a shiver down my spine. The moment that had once been a celebration turned into an unspoken rift between us. As the season progressed, the rivalry only deepened. Practices were intense, filled with unspoken tension. I felt like I was walking on eggshells around Aaron. The banter we once shared became sparse, replaced by cold exchanges and awkward silences. I noticed that he started spending more time with other teammates, and it stung. I missed my friend. One afternoon, after a particularly heated practice, I confronted him. "Aaron, what's going on? We used to be best friends. Now it feels like we're enemies." He shot me a look that was a mix of frustration and sadness. "You don't get it, do you? This isn't just about basketball for me. You've taken everything I wanted." His words hit me hard. I realized that our friendship was crumbling under the weight of our ambitions. I tried to reason with him, to remind him of the good times we shared, but it felt like talking to a wall. Weeks turned into months, and our friendship continued to deteriorate. Every game became a reminder of the bond we had lost. We both played well, and while the team had success, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. I found myself celebrating victories alone, the joy overshadowed by the absence of my best friend. Then came the championship game, a culmination of everything we had worked toward. The atmosphere was electric, the stands packed with cheering fans. As the game unfolded, I felt the adrenaline rush through me, but in the back of my mind, I couldn't ignore the tension between Aaron and me. In the fourth quarter, we were neck and neck with the opposing team. I made a play that led to a basket, and the crowd erupted. But just moments later, Aaron missed a crucial shot, and I could see the disappointment etched on his face. It was as if the air had been sucked out of the gym. After the game, I felt conflicted. We had won the championship, but it felt more like a hollow victory. As we celebrated with the team, I glanced over to see Aaron standing apart, his expression one of defeat. I knew I had to reach out. "Aaron," I called, making my way through the crowd. "Can we talk?" He looked at me, a mixture of anger and hurt in his eyes. "What's there to say? You got what you wanted." I shook my head, frustration boiling over. "I didn't want this. I wanted us to win together, to enjoy this moment as friends." "Friends," he scoffed. "You've been so focused on your own success that you forgot about us." His words stung. It was true. I had let the competition cloud my judgment. I had sacrificed our friendship for a title, and it was a realization that hit me hard. "I'm sorry, Aaron. I never wanted it to be like this. Can we start over?" He hesitated, the conflict evident on his face. "I don't know if it's that simple." I understood his pain. We had lost so much, and rebuilding trust wouldn't happen overnight. "I miss you, man. I miss my best friend. Can we at least try to fix this?" After a long silence, he nodded slowly. "I miss you too, but it's going to take time. With that, we began to slowly repair the damage that had been done. It wasn't easy. We had to confront the hurt feelings and misunderstandings that had built up over the months. We started hanging out again, though it felt different. The laughter was tentative, but with each conversation, the tension began to fade. We also agreed to have open communication about our aspirations in basketball. Instead of competing against each other, we decided to support one another. It felt like a fresh start, and it was liberating to know we were working as a team again, not just on the court, but in life. As the next season rolled around, we both set individual goals, encouraging each other to pursue our dreams without losing sight of our friendship. The bond we shared began to strengthen, and slowly but surely, the rivalry faded into the background. We learned to celebrate each other's victories without jealousy, appreciating the journey rather than just the outcome. The experience taught us valuable lessons about friendship and competition. We realized that while it's natural to want to succeed, it's equally important to nurture the relationships that matter most. Looking back, I'm grateful for that challenging time in our lives. It forced us to confront our insecurities and made us appreciate the true meaning of friendship. Today, Aaron and I are closer than ever, and our bond is built on trust, respect, and a shared love for the game. Now, we often reminisce about that tumultuous season and laugh about how far we've come. The rivalry that once threatened to tear us apart ultimately brought us back together, stronger than ever. In the end, it was a reminder that true friends are worth fighting for, even when the road gets rocky. We learned to navigate the ups and downs of life together, knowing that no matter the challenges, we would always have each other's backs. Story 10. The day I discovered my childhood home held a dark secret. Growing up, my childhood home was a haven. Nestled at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac, it was a place filled with laughter, warmth, and countless memories. My parents worked hard to create a loving environment, and as the only child, I soaked up every bit of their attention. My home was where I learned to ride my bike, where I hosted birthday parties, and where I navigated the trials of adolescence. But little did I know that beneath the surface of those happy memories lay secrets that would unravel my perception of my past. It all began when I decided to return home for the summer after finishing my first year of college. I was excited to reconnect with my parents and relive the nostalgia of my childhood. As I drove down the familiar streets, memories flooded back, the tree where I had carved my initials, the park where I played with friends, and of course, the cozy warmth of my home. Upon arriving, I was greeted with the usual hugs and laughter. My parents were thrilled to see me, and the days passed quickly as we caught up on everything. We went out to dinner, watched movies together, and I even helped my dad with a few home improvement projects. But as I settled back into my old room, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. One evening, while rummaging through some old boxes in the attic, I stumbled upon a dusty, faded journal. It was small, the cover cracked, and it looked as though it hadn't been opened in years. Curiosity piqued, I brushed off the dust and opened it. The pages were filled with delicate handwriting, and as I read the first few entries, I realized it belonged to my mother. The entries started off innocently enough, detailing mundane aspects of her life, her daily routine, her thoughts about work, and her excitement about starting a family. But as I flipped through the pages, I began to notice a shift. Her tone became darker, more anxious. She wrote about strange noises coming from the basement, unexplained feelings of dread, and the constant feeling of being watched. My heart raced as I read her fears, which escalated over time. "Something is off in this house," one entry read. "I can't shake the feeling that I'm not alone. It's like there's a presence here that doesn't want me to feel comfortable." I felt a chill run down my spine. I had never heard my mother mention any of this before. I had always thought our home was a place of safety. Intrigued and slightly unnerved, I continued to read. My mother wrote about dreams that felt vivid and real, where she would wake up in a cold sweat, convinced she had seen someone standing at the foot of her bed. In one particularly alarming entry, she described a night when she heard what sounded like whispering coming from the basement. "Every time I go down there, I feel like I'm being drawn into something I don't understand," she wrote. "I don't know what it is, but I can't ignore it any longer." I closed the journal, my mind racing. I decided to confront my parents about what I had read, but fear gripped me. What if they had been keeping something from me all these years? What if there was a real reason behind my mother's fears? The next evening, I gathered the courage to bring it up. We were sitting in the living room, enjoying a quiet moment together when I finally spoke. "Mom, I found your journal in the attic," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Her face paled, and my father glanced over at her, a look of concern etched across his features. "Oh, sweetheart, you weren't supposed to find that," she said softly. "Why didn't you ever tell me about what you wrote?" "About the basement." I pressed, my curiosity overpowering my fear. My mother sighed deeply, her expression growing distant. "I didn't want to worry you. I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me. You know how stressful life can be. But you mentioned hearing things, feeling a presence." "That's not just stress," I countered, feeling the weight of her words. My father finally spoke up, his voice firm but gentle. "There's a lot we didn't tell you, son. Your mother went through a tough time. We thought it was best to protect you from those fears." "Protect me from what?" I demanded, feeling a mix of anger and confusion. "From the unknown," my father replied. "We believed it was simply an old house with creaky floors and pipes. But as time went on, we realized it might be more than that." "What do you mean?" I asked, my heart pounding. My mother hesitated before finally revealing. "When we first moved in, we didn't know about the history of this house. It belonged to a family before us, one that faced tragic circumstances. There were rumors about the previous owner, about things that happened in the basement." "Things?" I echoed, feeling a wave of anxiety wash over me. "Your mother and I have experienced things that are hard to explain," my father continued. "Things we couldn't rationalize. Strange noises, objects moving on their own, even the feeling of cold drafts in the middle of summer." I leaned back, trying to process the information. "Why didn't you ever tell me any of this?" "We didn't want to frighten you," my mother replied. "We thought if we ignored it, it would go away. But after reading your mother's journal, I think we should confront this together." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, haunted by the thoughts of what my parents had shared. My childhood home, once a sanctuary, now felt like a place filled with shadows. The next morning, I woke up determined to face whatever my parents had been hiding. I approached them over breakfast and suggested we investigate the basement together. They exchanged glances, and I could see the hesitation in their eyes. "I know it sounds crazy, but if there's something down there, we should confront it," I insisted. After some back and forth, my parents reluctantly agreed. We made our way to the basement door, a heavy wooden door that creaked ominously as my father opened it. The stairs descended into darkness, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. As we stepped inside, I was hit with a musty odor, mixed with a hint of something metallic. The air was thick, and I could feel a strange tension in the room. I switched on a flashlight, illuminating the concrete walls, and immediately noticed strange markings scratched into the surface. "Do you see that?" I whispered, pointing at the markings. My parents leaned in closer, their expressions a mix of fear and curiosity. "What do you think it means?" my mother asked, her voice trembling. "I don't know, but it looks like something was trying to communicate," I replied, my heart racing. We explored the basement further, searching for any signs of what could have caused my mother's fears. As we delved deeper, we discovered a small door hidden behind stacks of old boxes. My heart raced as I approached it, and I exchanged a glance with my parents. "Should we open it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "We need to know what's behind there," my father replied, his determination evident. With shaking hands, I turned the handle and pushed the door open. A gust of cold air rushed past me, and I stumbled back, gasping. Inside was a small room, filled with cobwebs and darkness. As I shone my flashlight around, I noticed an old trunk in the corner. "What is that?" my mother asked, her eyes wide with fear. "Only one way to find out," I said, stepping inside the room. My parents followed closely behind, their apprehension palpable. I approached the trunk, feeling an overwhelming sense of dread. I knelt down and lifted the lid. Inside were old photographs, letters, and various trinkets, items that seemed to tell a story of a family long gone. My heart raced as I sifted through the contents, each item unveiling a glimpse into a past filled with sorrow. Among the photographs, I found a picture of a family standing in front of the house, their faces smiling, but their eyes telling a different story. It was eerie, as if they knew something terrible was about to happen. "Look at this," I said, holding up a letter. It was dated decades ago, written in a shaky hand. It talks about losing a child in the house. They mention hearing laughter that turned to screams. My parents exchanged horrified glances. "What does that mean?" my mother whispered. "I think the stories we've heard about this house might be true," I said, my voice shaking. As we continued to investigate, we uncovered more about the family that once lived there. It became evident that tragedy had struck them hard, and the whispers my mother heard might not have just been in her imagination. Just then, we heard a creak above us, followed by the unmistakable sound of a child's laughter echoing through the basement. My heart dropped, and I turned to my parents, fear etched on their faces. "We should go," my father said urgently. "No. We can't leave now," I insisted. "We need to understand what happened." Suddenly, the air grew colder, and a wave of dread washed over us. We could feel the presence around us, and it was as if the house itself was alive with memories that refused to let go. Just then, the lights flickered, and for a brief moment, we saw a figure standing at the doorway, a child, no older than 7, with sad eyes watching us. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my mother grip my arm tightly. "Who are you?" I called out, my voice trembling. The figure didn't respond. Instead, it turned and disappeared down the hallway, leaving us in stunned silence. "What just happened?" my mother gasped, her face pale. "I think we need to follow," I said, heart racing. We stepped cautiously out of the basement, the figure leading us back through the house. It led us to the living room, where we had spent countless hours laughing and playing games. But now, it felt heavy with sorrow. "Why are you showing us this?" I whispered, addressing the empty space around us. In response, the child appeared again, pointing toward the fireplace. I approached slowly, and as I examined it, I noticed a small, loose brick. With trembling fingers, I pried it out, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a locket, delicate and tarnished with age. I opened it to find a picture of the child and a woman, presumably the mother. As I held it in my hand, I felt a surge of emotion wash over me. "This was yours, wasn't it?" I said softly, looking at the child's ghostly form. Suddenly, a warm breeze enveloped the room, and I felt an overwhelming sense of sadness. "I'm sorry," I whispered, tears welling up in my eyes. "We didn't know." The child nodded slowly, and for a brief moment, I felt a connection, a bond forged through shared loss and understanding. In that moment, I realized that the house held more than just fear. It contained the echoes of love and grief. The laughter my mother heard was a reminder of happier times, a signal that this child was not lost, but still lingering in a place that once brought joy. As we stood together in silence, I felt my parents' presence beside me. We were no longer just a family living in this house. We were part of its history, woven into its very fabric. "We can't erase the past," I said, my voice steadying. "But we can honor it." With that, the child smiled softly, and as quickly as they appeared, they vanished into the light. The air grew warm again, and for the first time since entering the basement, I felt a sense of peace. We left the room, knowing we would never forget this experience. We spent the rest of the summer embracing the memories we had uncovered, sharing stories of the family that once lived in our home. We made a pact to honor their legacy, ensuring that their laughter won. In the following weeks, we hung the locket in our living room as a reminder of our journey. We shared the story with friends and family, allowing the memory of the child to live on, a testament to the enduring power of love and the importance of acknowledging our past. Returning to college, I carried the experience with me, understanding that the shadows of our history shape who we are. My childhood home was more than just a house. It was a sanctuary filled with memories, both light and dark, that taught me the value of compassion, understanding, and healing. The journey also deepened my bond with my parents. We became closer, navigating the complexities of our shared experiences. The summer had changed us, teaching us that confronting the past, no matter how painful, can lead to healing and connection. I often reflect on that summer, how it began with a simple drive down familiar streets and evolved into a profound journey of discovery. The house that once felt like a sanctuary revealed its secrets, bringing us closer together as a family and reminding us that love endures even in the darkest of times. As I look back, I'm grateful for the courage we found to face the unknown. It transformed our understanding of home and family, reminding us that every house has a story to tell, and it's up to us to listen, learn, and carry those stories forward. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more crazy, real Reddit stories. Hit the bell to get notified when new stories drop. See you next time on Reddit Story Vault.